Well, fellows, it appears that I have lost a key battle in my relationship with my wife. I said, hey, if you want the trimmed beard look, I'm not going to comb my hair or do anything with it. I'm literally just going to walk out of the shower. I'm going to dry it. And that's my hairdo until I can grow a man's beard again. And it turns out because the barber styled my hair like this, that I'm going to have to stay this way. And I don't know. It's apropos to the situation that we're going to talk about with Ultimate Spider-Man number 4 today, which is all about relationships, written by Jonathan Hickman with art by David Messina. Marco Cicchetto's taking this one off. And I will say this, in the end, I will have my victory, fellas. I will eventually get an 85-inch HD TV with the newest technology that we can't afford and don't need. And I will finally get my revenge for this haircut. But today's conversation about Ultimate Spider-Man is all about relationships and how they're awkward and the different stages of relationships, specifically within marriages, like when you have kids and your priorities change and you're different people at that point, because we are having a double dinner date with Peter and MJ with Harry Osborn and his wife, Gwen Stacy. This is the first appearance of Gwen Stacy in Ultimate Spider-Man. And it was a curiosity once we saw the variant cover. I was like, what are they going to do with the character? What's going to be the big difference? You know, she's not dead. Obviously, she's married to Harry. Those are big differences. It turns out she's kind of an uppity bitch. And once you get Harry Osborn out of the Green Goblin costume, he's pretty much a douchebag. And that's the best way that I could characterize these versions of classic Spider-Man characters. And I must say, this comic book is an enormous disappointment. I've enjoyed issues 1, 2, and 3, and I don't hate this one. I don't dislike it like I dislike this week's Amazing Spider-Man or Superior Spider-Man or a lot of the other Spider-Man trash that's out there. Black Cat and Jackpot number 2, I'm looking at you. But this is severely disappointing after 3 pretty damn good issues that were getting better over time. We're already on a filler issue, or I guess we need to take a breather since we got the reveal that Harry Osborn was a Green Goblin, and he's a good guy. It is an absolute slog to get through. There's not a whole lot enjoyable about this unless you really wanted to see the different relationships and the dynamics between the two couples, because that's what the comic book is. There's no action, there's no Spider-Man, no intrigue, no forward progression on any of the stories whatsoever. Let's get into the book, starting with the art by David Messina, and he admittedly has little to nothing to work with here. I'm very glad they actually changed out Marco Cicchetto for David Messina for this particular issue, because I wouldn't have wanted to see Marco Cicchetto wasted on an expository date night book. And it's mostly 9-panel grids of couples holding each other's hands, being awkward around each other, having facial expressions that are way over the top for what's actually being discussed or what's been revealed. There's one thing that's really, really strange about the entire issue. It's the wine glasses. There's so many shots of wine glasses, and I think they were like, wouldn't it be cool if we could see the reflection of the other couple or the person they're talking to in the wine glass itself? And it turns out it wasn't very cool. It was just really distracting. I was like, why are they doing this? I don't know what's going on here, but it doesn't particularly look cool. But you get a lot of those until the very end, where it looks like David Messina was like, fuck this. I'm tired of putting all this extra detail into the stupid wine glass that does nothing to enhance the story and just kind of looks like bullshit, especially once it was colored. I bet it looked much better when it was pencils and inks and whatever. Once you threw the color in there, it just looks weird. But a lot of this comic book admittedly does look weird. This book is like the movie that's filmed on a shoestring budget about what it's like to be a married couple in Seattle, and it goes to Sundance and everyone's talking about it, but then they put it in theater, someone picks it up for distribution, and it makes no money. It's a strange story, and most of it really is just the awkwardness of the two couples and where they are in their lives. Obviously, Peter and MJ have been married for a long time. They have 2 children. Their priorities are just vastly different than what Harry and Gwen Stacy are going through. Harry and Gwen Stacy are a power couple. You know, they eat at exclusive restaurants. They've thought about kids, but they don't want to bring kids into this world. It would seem to be a mean thing to do. And even Peter Parker's like, what's the hold up on the kids? Realizing what an enormous blessing the children are. I can kind of understand that. Once you're married, I've been married for, oh my goodness, coming up on 9 years now. I didn't realize it had been that long. What do I need to get my wife for a 10-year anniversary? I should probably be saving up already. She probably is going to want or expect something really nice. But once you're married, you end up like dating other couples. And inevitably, you get the one kid, maybe still hang out with the couples that are single and out drinking and stuff. And you try to act like you can maintain and keep up with them. But once you've got 3 kids like we do, you're exclusively dating other married couples that have kids that are about the same age as your kids. And this is obviously an oil and water mashup. And for the most part, you wouldn't understand why Peter and MJ would ever want to hang out with these people ever again. They talk down to them ad nauseum throughout all the conversations, and there's many of them. And I guess it's just about the difference between couples, like in their marriages and how things change when you have children. It just doesn't really work for a Spider-Man comic book. Maybe as the C plot in a Spider-Man comic book, where maybe there's a date night in the middle and you get 4 pages of this while you actually have real stuff happening around it, which makes this comic book read really, really poorly. And it's almost like a jolt to the system. It was like, man, I was expecting good Spider-Man. Now, this certainly isn't Zeb Wells level terrible Spider-Man, but this isn't what I or probably most Spider-Man fans were expecting coming into Ultimate Spider-Man number 4. We do get to learn some information about MJ. She has been highlighted very much. And in fact, I would say Peter Parker himself, like what his motivations are, what he's feeling and all that, it's been touched down a bit, but he's almost been on the back burner. We've been getting more information on characters like Ben Parker and J. Jonah Jameson and stuff like that. We finally get really introduced to Mary Jane for the first time, and she talks about how she used to be a model, and she was doing her own PR work, and she was so successful, and people were so impressed that a PR firm ended up hiring her to do professional PR work, and then she got poached to another company, and eventually she created her own business, I guess, that specializes in crisis management or something like that. And they're all snooty and talking around it, and you can see that Harry Osborn would rather laugh at her than take her seriously. But then she starts talking about the new business that Uncle Ben and J. Jonah Jameson have created. 2 old fogies that have been in the newspaper business their entire lives are actually going to become like online bloggers. And the name of their news website is going to be The Paper, which is a name, I guess, that MJ herself picked out, showing off her bona fides in front of Gwen Stacy and Harry Osborn, who do take notice, specifically Gwen Stacy, because eventually one of them excuses themselves to the ladies' room. The other one says, I'll join you. And they go in there and they're being really snotty to each other. And then Gwen's like, hey, I was listening to what you're doing with your business. And Harry and I have a bunch of extra money that we need to get off the books. It sounds like they want some type of tax shelter or something like that. Something that's actually going to burn and lose money, which I imagine The Paper, a new online news publication, is absolutely destined to lose money, probably for the life of the existence of the company, not just the first 5 years or whatever. She talks about, well, we've used charities, we've used donations, nonprofits. I had you in mind. Immediately, MJ is like, what, you want to give us money? And then she's like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. Maybe she'll be the angel investor for The Paper because J. Jonah Jameson and Ben Parker don't have a lot of money. And she mentions that, I've always wanted to launch a pirate ship. So it sounds like Gwen Stacy and Harry Osborn are going to be using The Paper as some type of tax shelter. They mentioned that they just had the Oscorp takeover of Stain Stark Industries a few months ago, an obvious reference to the Oscorp Stark logo that was on the Green Goblin armor and all that kind of stuff. So they're trying to hide some money. I imagine this is for nefarious means. I don't think by the end of this, Harry and the Green Goblin are going to be good guys. I'll kind of explain that here in a little bit. But while the 2 ladies are out talking business in the bathroom and putting on their lipstick or whatever, there is a conversation going on between Harry Osborn and Peter Parker. And Harry's like, hey, you haven't told her yet. And Peter's like, what? Did you tell Gwen that you're the Green Goblin? He's like, yeah, I told her everything, obviously insinuating that he also told her that Peter Parker is the Spider-Man, the other mass vigilante that's out there trying to save people. And Peter thinks, rightly so, you are nuts. You can't actually go out there and tell people your secret identity, even the people that you love the most. But he does mention, yeah, my daughter did catch me in costume. We're not trying to let mommy in on it. We're certainly not letting the rest of the family in on it. And Harry's like, well, I would never lie to my wife. I have to tell her everything. And Peter's like, yeah, that is important. I would love to tell Mary Jane, but I would be putting her and the rest of my family in ridiculous amounts of danger, letting that kind of information out there, accidentally slipping into the public. And next thing you know, they're the target of whoever we're trying to stop, whether it be the Shocker or any of the other villains out there. Obviously, you got Kingpin running around and stuff like that. And so there's obviously a big difference of opinion regarding philosophies on whether or not you should let out your secret superhero identity or whatnot. Peter is doing the right thing, is like, no, you actually don't disclose that to anybody. It's unfortunate my daughter found out. Hopefully she doesn't let that one out of the bag, and I wish you hadn't told your wife or whatever. And Harry's like, well, can you live with the consequences? Obviously setting something up. You definitely get the feeling the Parkers do not want to go on another double date with the Osborns. And I imagine Peter is already regretting ever allowing himself to show his superhero identity. Now, he couldn't stop it because apparently the suit being used by Peter Parker is also like proprietary of Stain Stark, and he was able to remove the mask and whatever. It's not like Peter wanted to show Harry Osborn. The only thing I really did like about the comic book, and saying it's something that I really did like, is probably an oversell on how much I enjoyed this. I did like the fact that when Uncle Ben and J. Jonah Jameson are watching the Parker kids, immediately little May does not like J. Jonah Jameson. And I know how she felt. You remember when you were a kid and you'd be around your grandparents and they were awesome, but then when their friends came over, they would all smell weird and stuff. You're like, I don't like that guy. She had one of those reactions to J. Jonah Jameson. Obviously, she's got some spidey sense built into her, and she could just kind of tell J. Jonah Jameson is going to be a shit stirrer. He's probably going to cause problems for my daddy, and I don't like him very much, which, you know, felt like something that happens with kids. And the best part about that, it was literally done in like 2 panels, which is about how much most of the major reveals in this comic book probably needed to get the story out. I have major issues with Jonathan Hickman always using data pages and stuff like this. But for the most part, the 3 big reveals in this comic book could have been done in data pages, or could have been done when Green Goblin and Spider-Man were fighting somebody like in action and all that kind of stuff. You could have these conversations. But basically, we know that Harry Osborn, Oscorp, bought out Stain Stark Industries. We know MJ is starting a crisis management firm. We know that Harry told Gwen he's Green Goblin and Peter is Spider-Man, but Peter has not done the same thing. And I guess the last thing that would have been established in here, the name of Uncle Ben and J. Jonah Jameson's news website is going to be thepaper.com or whatever. Not exactly enormous reveals in here. Nothing was pushed forward. Of the 3 big reveals in this particular comic book, the only one that feels like it has any real purpose is Harry Osborn informing Peter that he has told Gwen Stacy that he's Green Goblin and Peter hasn't. I don't expect Green Goblin to be a hero much longer within Ultimate Spider-Man. I think his destiny is to be a villain. And I think Gwen Stacy's destiny is also to die. And I believe Harry telling Gwen Stacy that he's Green Goblin will ultimately lead to her death and him turning, obviously, to the dark side to being a villain, and probably holding that against Peter Parker because he hadn't told his wife and put his wife in danger will likely be that turning point to make Green Goblin a bad guy in the end, because that's what he was destined to do. What this is all doing is putting the heroes back in order and getting the villains back in place. So I imagine that's going to lead to a big tragedy for Harry Osborn. Certainly Peter and MJ will feel it as well. Otherwise, not a whole lot going on here of much importance. I guess it was just an introduction to Gwen Stacy. And I imagine they thought just that character returning would be enough to sell this comic book. But, you know, for me personally, for $5, like, you're not getting $5 worth of anything in here. You know, 9-panel grids, really, really slow read, really boring, tedious. I already know that couples without children going on a double date with couples with multiple children are going to have completely different priorities. It's going to be an oil and water kind of situation. They're not really going to mix well. So nothing really was established here was even fun. The dialogue was perfectly fine. I've seen much worse dialogue in modern comic books, you know, modern Spider comic books. So at least the dialogue wasn't completely off-putting and terrible, but there's not a ton to like about this comic book. There's not really anything to love about this comic book other than May, maybe. And unless you just really love Gwen Stacy and you're really happy that she's back and you don't mind that she's kind of an uppity bitch or whatever, and you don't mind that she's married to a complete douchebag in Harry Osborn, then maybe you're excited. But for me, I was just going, I know that David Messina is going to be here for one more issue before Marco Cicchetto returns. I don't want another filler issue. Please do something. Otherwise, just skip a month and come back with Ultimate Spider-Man #5 where he's actually doing something. You know, we don't need these enormous breaks when it comes to story progression. You just started it. And I think people deserve more for their $5 than what they got here. I thought this was, I think ridiculous is an appropriate word when it comes to this particular comic book. and the expectation people had coming into Ultimate Spider-Man. It's not the worst thing in the world. It's not something that makes me think, oh, I have to give up this series. There's no way they can make this right. But it does make me go, what the hell happened here? What the fuck, bro? Because I don't think this is what people were exactly looking for when we had a married Peter Parker with kids or whatever. Yes, that should certainly be a part of the story, but he still actually needs to be Spider-Man for the most part. And maybe we could wait a year or two before we actually take Spider-Man out of the entire story and just do a complete filler issue of nothing being accomplished within the comic book. So if I had to rate it, I would give it like 3 out of 5, maybe 5.5, 6 out of 10, something like that. Certainly below average. Not the worst thing in the history of the world, but nothing to write home about, and certainly something to get a little bit upset about because Marvel basically delivered nothing this week, and DC delivered nothing this week worth reading. Your one hope was Ultimate Spider-Man, and when it doesn't deliver, it kind of stings because nothing else is delivering right now for the most part. The only thing that was really delivering this week were indie comic books, and if you're wondering what are the best indie comic books out there, I would suggest go over to Thinking Critical Patreon. Jim and I recorded the Hot or Not podcast yesterday. It's live on Patreon right now. And we talk about all the comic books from Marvel, DC, and indie comic books. And basically all the recommendations came from the indie comic book scene because that's where it's at. There's a link in the video description if you're interested in checking out the Hot or Not podcast on Patreon.